Um, it's a practice that we live every day, being in partnership with young people. Today's session really builds on that commitment by naming something we know to be true. Youth voice isn't symbolic, it's definitely not a checkbox. It's a leadership practice, one that requires shared power, it requires intentional structure, and adults willing to lead with young people rather than for young people. So today's conversation really comes at a critical juncture and an intentional moment. This year, NYLC and the Points of Light are bringing together our two conferences, the National Service Learning Conference and the Points of Light Annual Conference, along with our two communities, our two focused areas on that deep commitment to civic engagement, to service, democracy. And at the heart of this partnership is a shared belief that young people are not just participants in systems built by adults, but leaders who deserve real power in shaping those systems. So by convening together, we're modeling that very shift. We're inviting that shared leadership, moving from silos to collaboration, from intention to action. This shared partnership also challenges us to think differently about how we show up alongside young people and how our institutions can really evolve with youth voice if it's not added, but it needs to be built in. And yet, even in spaces where we're committed to youth engagement, sometimes those tensions really remain. Too often, young people are invited to speak, but not decide. They're asked for input, but not trusted to be leaders. So today, we're naming that reality. We're exploring what it looks like to move from listening to young people to leading with youth. It's a shift that requires honesty. It asks adults to really examine how power is held, how decisions are made, how long-standing structures, whether that's in schools or our nonprofit spaces or policy spaces, how they continue to center adult authority, even if there is an intention of that inclusion of youth voice. It also requires young people to be recognized not as those future leaders, but leaders right now, bringing that lived experience, insights, and especially those solutions that our communities so desperately need. So this session is intentionally intergenerational. We're convening as co-experts, youth and adults together, each carrying wisdom, responsibility, and influence in the work of shared leadership. There's no single right answer here. It's a conversation, and it's a commitment to doing better together. So if you're an educator, a nonprofit leader, policymaker, an advocate, a young leader, our hope is that you leave today not only with the idea of reflection, but also action steps, right? So how can you think about youth voice and how it currently shows up in your space? And then what are some concrete ideas to strengthen that authentic youth adult partnership in practice, not just in principle? So this partnership between NYLC and Points of Light really represents exactly the kind of shared leadership we're exploring today. Two organizations with complementary strengths coming together to expand impact and opportunity, amplify youth leadership on a national and global scale. And so to share more about this collaboration and what it means and where we're headed, I'm so excited to introduce you to Vanessa Diamond. She's the Chief Global Impact and Program Officer at Points of Light. Vanessa.
Hi. Hi. Thank you, Amy. Welcome, everyone. I am really excited about this discussion, but more than that, I'm excited about the partnership that we have with NYLC and really actually every single person on this call. The fact that you signed up for this and you showed up for it meant that you want to learn, you want to participate, and we want to think about how we all show up for each other, no matter where we're coming from. Our work is firmly rooted at Points of Light in the concept that we all have a responsibility to engage, and that responsibility and that call to action is for everyone. No matter where you are in the country or in the world, no matter what type of organization you're with, what your role might be, what your age is, we all have a responsibility to each other, and how we work together in this type of intergenerational environment is vital so we can amplify all of our voices. At conference, we were really excited to be able to work with the NYLC team, both their staff and their youth leaders, to really think about what it means to be co-creators, offering those leaders the opportunity to help us collectively have new perspectives. And this concept of intergenerational leadership is really about building the architecture across all of our shared work so that we can reimagine how we do this social impact work together. So I know we've got a lot in front of us and great conversation in front of us. So I want to introduce Emelina Corin. She is the NYLC Youth Advisory Council member who is going to be our moderator today. She is a senior at Athens Academy in Athens, Georgia. She is going to attend University in Georgia as a political science major. But more than anything, when you look at her bio, what really struck me is she is involved in volunteering, community organizing, advocacy, civic leadership, and really embraces that full spectrum of what it means to engage, what civic engagement can mean to a person and something that they're passionate about, and what it means to show up in all kinds of different ways. And so I will pass it over to Emelina to navigate us through this conversation.
Thank you, Amy and Vanessa, for grounding us in why we're here today. Hello, everyone, and welcome to today's session. This panel today is about more than listening to young people. It's about what happens when youth are trusted as leaders, co-creators, and decision makers. This conversation brings together youth and adults not as a panel of experts and an audience of learners, but as co-experts shaping what shared leadership really looks like in practice. We're especially excited to host this conversation in partnership with Points of Light and to be convening at the intersection of two conferences committed to civic engagement, service, and democracy. Before we begin, a quick note about how we're holding this space. We ask everyone to listen generously, reflect honestly, and stay grounded in real experiences rather than abstract ideas. Youth voice is not symbolic, it's actionable, challenging, and essential. I'm excited to introduce our panelists today. I'll keep introductions brief and invite you to learn more about their work through the bios shared. Ryan Pickman is a curriculum specialist with Stockton Unified School District, where he works to center student voice within curriculum design and civic learning. Alex Edgar is with Made by Us, working at the national level to connect young people with civic institutions and reimagine how history, democracy, and participation are shaped. Azim Khamisa is the founder of the Tariq Khamisa Foundation, whose work in restorative justice, violence prevention, and forgiveness has reached millions worldwide. Thank you all for being here and for the leadership you bring into this space. To start us off, I wanted to ground this conversation in lived experience. When you hear the phrase adult-centric spaces, what comes to mind based on your own experience? And where have you seen youth voice either meaningfully centered or clearly sidelined? Ryan, I'd like to start with you.
So when I hear adult-centric spaces, and as a teacher, as someone within education, when I walk into a classroom and I see straight rows of desks, instructor up front, all attention is centered at one person in the room, and it's the teacher, that's the adult-centered space. The students really lack that interaction, lack that ability to share their voice with each other because all attention's directed up front. When you really see that shifting to more of a student-centered or student voice, I love walking into the career technical education classes right now, your CTE classes, your ethnic studies classes. You walk in, and it's not a traditional classroom. A lot of times it's tables or it's workstations, and the kids are talking to each other throughout. The kids are the ones, yes, the teacher's facilitating, gives them here's the instruction, but now you work with it and you as a team solve and interact. And so that's how we create more of a student-centered space, is when we allow them to do the work and allow them to, at times it's struggling through it. At times it's relying on each other, but walking into a classroom and seeing the straight rows, everyone's sitting down at full attention forward. That's the adult-centered space, and all attention's on the teacher, and everything's relied on the teacher. And 21st century, we need to start moving away from that. We need to start finding that environment where kids have agency in the classroom.
All right, Alex, you're next.
Oh boy. And what is an adult-centric space? You mean our world? And I think the honest truth is, most systems, most institutions, both here in the US, but also all across the world are truthfully, mainly built for the adults that exist within them. And honestly, ends up being primarily like the maybe 30 to 60-year-old category of adults, not even our older adults, that oftentimes also face age discrimination in the same way that young people do. So for me, when I'm thinking about how do we make that transition from from an adult-centric space to one that is more focused on the intergenerational collaboration and ability for young people and elders to come together, I've really looked at my own experiences. And the reason why I got started in this work, as Emiliana shared, I do a lot of work nationally focused on youth civic engagement, youth service, but also really thinking about how do we make these institutions change for the better. And I think the biggest kind of like first step is just recognizing that we all belong in these spaces, and all of our voices bring a different, unique perspective to the table. And that oftentimes when young leaders like myself, and not to speak for Emiliana, but I'm sure she's had similar experiences where like you're in a room and they're like, oh, this cute kid, we're so touched that you're here. And it's like, no, this is a young person that is, taking time out of their busy schedule, their busy lives to share their wisdom, their knowledge, their experience. So I think that that's like the entry level of like, how do we treat every person that comes into our spaces with respect and autonomy? So we're not infantilizing, we're not making them feel less than simply because of their age, and really enabling these spaces to be ones in which we all, at the very least, when we enter, are on the same page. Then there's, the many steps before and after that. But I'll stop there for now.
Alex, you can absolutely speak for me. You are definitely hitting it exactly. I feel like sometimes you step into a room and people are like, oh, a kid has decided to share their voice. And sometimes they don't even realize that there's subject areas where I've had discussions where I've actually had more experience than some adults, and adults tend to treat me as if I don't.
1000%. I always think of like when you look at these big organizations and they have like 60 and 70-year-olds leading their social media. And I just sit there and I'm like, I feel like most of us probably like we're on it more. Like subject matter experts.
Exactly. We will continue with that conversation, but Azim, to finish us off with this first question on adult-centric spaces.
Yes, thank you for organizing this. I think it's important to have voices of the youth. I always believe that they probably have better idea of solutions than we adults do. As I point out to the kids I speak to, that we adults haven't done a very good job in making sure young people have a safe future in our country. We lose a lot of kids every waking hour of every day in the richest nation in the world. And that shouldn't be the way it is. It's not true of other first world countries. And this happened to me actually 31 years ago, like a week ago. The anniversary was the January 21st when I lost my son, aspiring San Diego State student, studying journalism, worked as a pizza delivery man, was lured to a bogus address by a youth gang, and a 14-year-old in a gang initiation shot and killed him. That kind of brought my life to a crashing halt, as I'm sure most of you can acknowledge. But sometimes in deep trauma there is a spark of clarity, and I saw that there were victims at both ends of the gun, that he wasn't the enemy. The enemy was the peer pressure that forced many young men and women to fall through the crack and get involved with gangs, drugs, alcohol, weapons, and violence. And I started with a simple premise that violence is a learned behavior. No child is born violent. and the kid who killed my son wasn't born violent. So I ended up forgiving him, started a foundation. It's named after my son, Tariq Kamisa Foundation, tkf.org. Forgave my son's killer and started to teach the principles of nonviolence, of accountability, empathy, compassion. Forgiveness is a big part of our message, and peace building. And invited his grandfather to join me. The foundation is 30 years old now. We've reached a couple of million kids, successfully teaching these socio-emotional skills. And then 5 years after the tragedy, I met him, stayed with him for 20 years, advocating for his parole. Finally, he was released at 39, which was in 2019, and he's on staff of the foundation, very passionate about making sure other kids don't follow in his former footsteps, because he joined a gang at the age of 11. But it started with his grandfather and me, and our first assembly program was at Burney Elementary, where Tony, who took my son's life, was alma mater. That was his alma mater. He was a student there, and I got a call from the school psychologist or school social worker, saying that these kids are very confused, because he was the first 14-year-old in the state of California to be tried as an adult, so his picture was on TV and newspapers, and they weren't very confused whether he's a celebrity or is he a criminal. So we did our first assembly with my grandfather, and I shared my testimony, he did. It was 750 kids, so we knew there would be a lot of questions, so we broke them into 3 groups of 250 each. And sure enough, the questions didn't stop, and the grandfather told his story, I told my story. And then the next day the principal called me and says, the kids have written letters to you. And I said, oh, I'll really be interested to see what the kids have to say. And when I went to pick up the letter, she gave me 375 letters. So almost every other kid wrote a letter, and then we thought, you know what, these concepts of accountability, empathy, compassion, forgiveness, peace building are not only teachable, our kids are hungry for them. And sure enough, I've done over 1,000 of assemblies, and we've had many kids that are part of our equation. One of our program is called the Peace Club. So we now have a curriculum which is grade specific from 3 levels, 4th and 5th, 6th and 7th, 8th and 9th and 10th. And it's a 10-week curriculum after the assembly. But one of my favorite programs is called the Peace Club. So we built a Peace Club on campuses, which is essentially a leadership program. And we inspire kids to become nonviolent leaders in their school, in their community. And we've had many that have taken the road of forgiveness and then graduated from university first time in their family's history. And then we also have a mentoring program, and then we have a program for parents that we were invited by UC Berkeley to create one based on restorative practices, which is what we teach to the kids. And during the pandemic, we developed a program for teachers, because as you probably would, Ryan talked about it too, the teachers are also very traumatized. But the crux of the work that we do at TKF is very much rooted in this basis on this conference, that youth voices are more important than the adult voices. And the focus that TKF has, especially in schools with adults, because part of the school system is very punitive. Expulsion and suspensions. We cut expulsions and suspensions by 70%. One of our programs is a mentoring program. The other programs go to the entire school. The mentoring goes to the kids that are on that slippery slope, which are very easy to identify. But essentially what we are doing is we are moving from a punitive mindset to a restorative mindset. All schools are not there yet. And when we go into schools, we make that very clear that initially, before we bring our programs into kids, that we have to work with faculty. And they have to be open to move to that restorative space, because then I think the conversation can be very rich between adults and the youth. So I'll stop there.
That was amazing. First, the thing that struck me the most out of what you said, apart from your heartbreaking story and how beautiful work that you've done afterwards, is you saying that violence is a learned behavior. That is such a powerful concept. I also think that what you're doing in terms of securing a safe future for youth is so timely in our present moment. I appreciate both Ryan and Azim bringing up schools. As a daughter of teachers and as someone who has been in pretty much every system of schooling, from public to private, I can tell you that we definitely see that punitive towards a restorative one, as well as systems of learning that are focused on collaboration rather than on straight lecture is something so important to me. I want to thank you all for your work and for your beautiful answers. And I want to go deeper into how power actually shows up in these spaces. So we have a few more targeted questions. We'll start with Alex. Working across national development partnerships, what patterns have you seen when organizations successfully treat youth as strategic partners rather than beneficiaries or advisors?
So, I mean, I am also just so inspired listening to this panel. So it's so awesome to be here. And in terms of patterns, I'd say a couple things that I see whenever it's done successfully and others that I see when it's done unsuccessfully. So the first thing I think that is incredibly important when we're talking about youth adult partnership, creating intergenerational leadership spaces, is that oftentimes an organization will say that we are, interested in bringing youth voices to the table, but are really only thinking about it as okay, we're gonna bring the voice and we're done. Yay, congrats, intergenerational leadership. And the reality is that if we want to do intergenerational leadership well, it requires a lot more attention, education, and partnership between the young leaders and the older leaders in order to make sure it goes well. So one of the biggest things I always recommend to folks as they're thinking through how do we kind of start flexing this muscle is it's going to require education on the part of the young people entering a space with primarily older leaders, and the older leaders on how do they interact with young people. Because one of the biggest things, similar to the comment Miliana and I were talking about before of being seen as cute, that also comes up is you'll enter a space as a young leader, and immediately the only thing that the older leaders will think of when they see you is, oh, my son, my daughter, my child, like you're so much like them, which is, again, just another thing really focusing on how do we train the older adults to see the young people as experts, but also to really understand like what is the additional give that has to happen when you're working with folks that it's perhaps their first time serving on a board, or maybe it's their first time having to understand like what is fiduciary responsibility? What does it look like to do development? Like there are a lot of big concepts that, like, as important as it is to bring younger voices to those tables, there's also going to be a lot of learning on both sides of how do we make sure that's done well. So I see that's the first thing. The second thing I think is like understanding the fact that it'll take a while to get it done correctly, and that the kind of struggle is part of the process. I think oftentimes organizations see it as like, okay, we are going to jump to like the premium tier of intergenerational partnership. When the reality is it often takes a lot of groundwork and trust building in order to do that in an effective manner. So with that, I think often thinking about organizations like NYLC and others that have resources that like can kind of show a roadmap of how do we kind of develop that strategic partnership where they're not just tokenized, but are actually integral partners at the table. And what that often looks like is, maybe instead of jumping to a super formalized position, like have you first convened a group of young people in your community or in your target audience to get their thoughts on your existing work? Like it's such an easy first step of just talking to young people. And so many organizations don't even have that capacity. So thinking through like how you kind of build it up from like talking to young people, providing volunteer and then paid. And it's super important if you're bringing a young person on, especially if they're in high school, they're in college, they're an early professional, that you're compensating them for their time, because most young people don't have jobs that enable them to just take off work, take off school, and super easily attend these opportunities. So if you really value their voices, 1000% need to think about compensation. But anyway, so really looking at it as like a journey, and it's something that like it's not going to always work on your first try, and that's okay. And that is really something that you'll be able to see the impact on the organization, but also on the young person. I can't begin to tell you how much my life has changed and the lives of my peers by the relationships we've developed with the older adults that have trusted us and put their time, energy, and dedication into growing our leadership and capacity. And then the last thing I'll share on this, when thinking about like, how does this appear unsuccessfully? And I think that the big thing that many young people that I work with and myself have experienced is an organization will make a big bet saying that we're going to institutionalize youth leadership and intergenerational collaboration. Say a lot of really great things, probably have a really good press release about the program or the youth advisory council that they're launching. And then ultimately it becomes a space that is, saying it's transactional is probably like underselling it. Like truthfully, like does not see the young people as much more than something to show funders, external partners, et cetera, that they're looking to engage young people. So I think being really careful and actually talking to the young people that you're interested in working with and seeing like what type of capacity do you and your peers have to dedicate? Like, what are you looking to learn? And like, how do you bring that together with the capacity of the organization? Because I think it is always better to get a slower on-ramp to doing intergenerational work than starting off doing it badly, because that's going to have a really negative effect on the young people that participate. And oftentimes when young people are tokenized at a young age, it turns them off from taking on additional civic leadership and leadership later in life, because they don't feel that those opportunities are ones that are made for them, especially if they're from marginalized communities or other backgrounds in which they have not traditionally seen folks like that represented. So yeah, I think that's kind of a key theme you'll hear from me a lot is like thinking about the intentionality when developing intergenerational programming and leadership, and really thinking about how do we kind of build the on-ramp in the best way possible.
Once again, 100% agree. I've served on several of boards where they ask you to submit feedback. We have several meetings where you have to take time off, and then it really goes nowhere. I'd say that's actually my biggest surprise working with NYLC. I remember I made a suggestion once, and they were like, yeah, we'll do it. And I was like, that easy? Okay. And so it's definitely become a space where I've become more comfortable just making suggestions and actually seeing that in action or having a bigger role. And I think that that's so important. You also mentioned educating both adults and youth. I think that that's such an interesting standpoint to take, not only as like institutionalizing it, but just talking, having those open conversations is so important. Azim, moving on. After founding the Tariq Kamisa Foundation from profound personal loss, how has your approach to partnership been shaped by recognizing that young people carry wisdom about violence, healing, and accountability that adults need to learn from?
That's a great question, and Emiliana, I know you mentioned earlier that I started with a simple premise that violence is a learned behavior. And if you accept that as an axiom or as a truism, I think it follows that nonviolence can also be a learned behavior. And we don't have a lot of programs that teach nonviolence. In our school, we are very STEM oriented. And yet, I think that kids are very hungry for this message and developing socio-emotional skills and resiliency. As an example, to answer your question, in San Diego we have High Tech High, and they have about 17 different schools that they run. Of course, they are also focused on STEM, but they were very moved. There's a lady by the name of Tina Schuster, who's a teacher there, that actually teaches the concept of teaching nonviolence in school. She lectures on restorative practices. And they were so moved that the students came together as a unit. Most of them were middle school, 6th, 7th, 8th graders that actually wrote a book called Victims at Both Ends of the Gun, which is kind of probably one of the first person to say that 30 some years ago. And they interviewed everybody that was involved with my tragedy, including Tony and his grandfather and Tariq's mother and me, and my daughter runs the Tariq Hamisa Foundation. And the book is now becoming a program. So the kids are actually designing the workbook of how do you bring these important concepts into the schools. And annually, I normally speak at not all of those 18, but some of the schools, and we include the parents in it. And what was interesting for me to learn that the program, because of the forgiveness element, and now I speak with Tony more than I do with the grandfather, because he's having some medical issues, and Tony's been on staff for the last 6 years, that there is communication between youth and parents as a result of the power of our message. And we teach 6 principles of what it takes to be a nonviolent leader. And we are getting amazing evaluations about how these concepts are transferring to kids. And we had 3 experts that kind of did an evaluation study. They followed kids. They looked at about 14 schools that we were at, and they talked to teachers and a lot of focus groups. And the attrition rate actually went the other way. They did an evaluation immediately after our assemblies, and then they went back 90 days, and the message was even stronger. And I thought that doesn't make any sense, because normally you expect them to go the other way. And they said that no, because of the power of the story, there's communications between kids within themselves, with the kids with the teachers, the kids with the parents. And this story continues to be talked about. And that's why 90 days later, your numbers are actually even better. They were better, immediately after, but they were even better after that. So that gave me a lot of hope that we need to continue to have this partnership, with teachers and adults, because the conversation between young people and adults it's not mainstream, and I think it needs to get mainstream.
Wow. Yeah, that was amazing. I really loved how you just took that phrase of violence as a learned behavior and kind of flipped it on its head with nonviolence. I see so often that ultra focus on STEM. I can tell you right now, I'm taking 4 STEM classes, even though I want to not go into that field. And yes, the children are hungry for ESL and to learn more about this field. I think it's so interesting that you brought up this group that wrote Victims at Both Ends of the Gun. For me, some of the most transformative experiences getting into service learning, and social work has been books, particularly the Hate You Give and Just Mercy, which I read pretty early into my high school career, really were formative experiences to learning about violence and social justice and advocacy. So I think that that's such an important principle, and to have that kind of education. Um, I really love that you ended talking about hope. Once again, I know we were talking about this earlier, but that idea of we can have nonviolence, we also can have a safe future is so inspiring. So thank you so much for your answer.
You're very welcome.
Ryan, to finish off this section, in your role as a curriculum specialist, what does it look like when students are positioned as co-designers rather than recipients of education?
Well, I want to go back to what Alex was saying, because I think Alex hit it right there at the end, and you alluded to it as well, Emiliana. When students are co-designers, it's not symbolic. It's not we're going to give a committee or we're going to create a youth foundation, we're going to create a title and then not listen to them. In a true co-designing relationship, the agency that the students have leads to action. It leads to change. It leads to them having a voice that is going to be listened to by whether it be the adults, whether it be the administrators, and having effective change. I'm fortunate in our school district right now. So in Stockton Unified, Dr. Rodriguez, our superintendent, this is one of her core values right now, is to get students involved and to have student voice. She did create a youth council. Immediately upon coming as superintendent, she gathered over 100 students that represent all of our high schools, not just our comprehensives, but our smaller specialty schools, our secondary schools, and to where she's brought them in to deal with real life issues. I mean, they're having folk monthly, they come in, and one of the focuses on facilities and listening to these students talk about what are the facility issues, what are the things you're seeing on your campuses that could be improved. And it's then the superintendent who brings in the head of facilities to listen to this. And we see the active change taking place. As a curriculum lead, we met with
Ryan, your audio cut out really quickly. I don't want us to miss what
oh,
you're saying.
is it back on? Can you
Yeah.
hear me? So what I was saying is we want to give the students a platform and we have to act upon what they tell us. We can't just brush it off as, oh, these are young voices. They don't know the big concerns that the larger district has, but they're the ones creating the positive change. Not just with the superintendent student advisory. What I'm seeing within our district is we're creating leadership classes. So we have peer leaders uniting students, and it's within those plus classes where I see student voice really being accepted and being the driving force. You walk into those classrooms and the teacher designs, okay, we're going to do a showcase, pop-up museum, but there's no structure to what it's going to be about. That's what the kids decide. They come in and what are the community issues? What are your concerns? So I go into Stagg High School last year. In Stagg High School, there's a class of about 35, 40 students, and they're looking at issues like one group, this group that I went into, they're looking at their special ed program, and they're realizing, well, we have students that are really being segregated in our school. They don't come to lunch with us. They don't go to assemblies. They don't go to our traditional events. Why? And they created a whole platform to go speak with the program directors, to go speak with the students, to go speak with the parents, and then design a more inclusive program, design a more inclusive process where they created lunchtime activities, where they created when you have your school assemblies that there was going to be an inclusive element. And that was directly from the students. That wasn't from the admin. That wasn't from the teachers. You're allowing students this space where they can use their ideas, and it's creating real life change. On that same campus, it was The unhoused population in Stockton was one of their biggest concerns. It's something that students are seeing. It's something that students want to be aware of. And they designed a hygiene program. They went to the local shelters. They went to the local agents and said, what do you need? What's the experiences that you can share with us that we can make a change within our community? And that's when they created this hygiene drive and collected materials and created a genuine program to try and create change in their neighborhood. That's co-designing, when you allow the students to use their own ideas and put it into play and see it happen. Um, Too often within our service, or too often when we talk about community service, it's top down from the adults. It's the teacher saying, okay, we're going to do this, this, and this. Now you guys just go out and collect. And the students don't have the emphasis or the input, and they don't have the interest because it didn't come from them. When you see the students designing and developing and doing the research and finding out what they're interested in, it happens. It's much more effective because the kids 100% put their effort into it, instead of, oh, this is a class assignment that my teacher told me I have to do, and I'm going to get a grade for it. I mean, most of these classes, when I look at Plus Leadership, they're not getting assessed on the outcome or the final product. They're getting assessed on the entire process. They're being taught that this isn't just a one-off. This is something that you're going to create a practice that can be repeated and can become a lifestyle change. And so that's one thing that I'm seeing within my school district, within the classroom, is really not just creating these opportunities for students, but allowing them to take control and allowing their voices to drive the outcome. And I think that's what Alex was alluding to. Too often, adults have this great idea. Let's create this. Let's do this. It'll look awesome. We can take pictures of it. Instead of, no, we're going to let the kids take over and let them create with their ideas and guide, but give them the reins. So that's what I'm seeing in education. I'm really fortunate that in our school district, our superintendent is encouraging that and pushing that direction.
Yeah, I think I speak for almost all students when I have just one follow-up question. Could you implement those leadership classes in our own high schools? Those sound absolutely awesome. I think it's so interesting that these programs come out of the students, such as the dealing with unhoused populations around the school, or trying to connect as a community. I think it kind of relates to what Azim was talking about earlier, that students are really hungry to solve these problems. And I see it so often in my personal groups that we're never really given that space to share it. So I think that's really awesome that your school district has it. And especially talking about what we see in schools, I think people forget that we spend most of our time at school. And therefore, we have a pretty hands-on grasp of what is going on or what problems we see around us.
Yeah, definitely.
So thank you for sharing. And I kind of wanted to do an open question. So I'm going to open this up to the full panel. What habits, structures, or fears keep adults from moving beyond consultation into a true shared decision making with young people?
Oh, share briefly. I think one of the things that comes up most frequently is that we don't feel very comfortable about having conversations about power. And I think it's a little scary of a thing to talk about. But in reality, any time that you're actually doing intergenerational leadership work, that often means that you are giving up some degree of power or control over the outcome, right? Because it means you are inherently opening up the pathways for this new audience, this new group of people, the young adults that are, either already part of your community or you'd like to be part of your community, that you're inviting them to share power with you. So I think the biggest thing that I often talk to folks about when it comes to that fear piece is that you got to get comfortable a bit with the uncertainty of what comes from bringing young people into that intergenerational leadership, because it is going to open up a world of possibilities in particular, thinking about how do we meet this moment, right? Like we are in a moment where young people don't trust our institutions. They don't have faith in our democracy. They don't believe higher education is going in the right direction. I mean, like, I'm sure like many of you are, quite appalled looking at the state of our country right now. And by not treating young people as equals, by not inviting our rising generations to the table, we are fundamentally handing them a broken future. And I think we all have to put it on ourselves to create that space and open those conversations, so we're able to really work on that fear of shared power, and how we can really use, instead of that as a fear, and instead turn that into an incentive structure of like, look at how exciting it is to push forward in a way that does not center our own needs, but actually thinks about what are the needs of the communities, in particular the young people that we're trying to serve.
Absolutely. That made me think of a quote that I've heard at one of NYLC's past conferences when I was a participant, speaking about youth adult partnerships, where a youth advocate came out and said that if we want our needs to be addressed, we need a seat at the table. So if you're not sitting at the table, your needs aren't on the menu. I think that's so important. Meeting this moment is also so important. Another quote that I've heard before is talking about not only addressing the problems now, but building our own vision for the future, which is something I think youth can do so much. I really love what you brought up. Other panelists who do this question are free to answer.
I think when that question has that term habits and structure in there, that's really what prevents that shared decision making within, for example, the school environment. The standards, the state standards, the pacing guides. We as teachers have this routine that we've been established with, and we're going to make it from point A to point B and end the year at point C, and I have to stay on pace. Prevents us from deviating, allowing students to have some decision-making process, because we've kind of organized our whole long-term planning and schedule, and then when we bring students into it, it might create change, or it might upset that balance that I've been teaching for 20 years. What I've been trying to accomplish in our district, what we've been trying to accomplish in our district is finding ways to implement service learning and student voice with the current curriculum. I mean, if we're taking world history, for example, I have a world history program at a certain high school where they're looking into the standards. They take something like industrialism, and you're talking about things that are taking place in the 1700s, early 1800s. But now let's talk to the kids about how does that apply to today? And let's have the kids look at, the students look at what similarities and what they want to research about modern day is affecting their lives. So instead of just looking at the past and reading it for regurgitating it for the test, let's have the kids have the opportunity to invest their time in something they're concerned with and see how it could compare, how it could line up with something they're learning. And so we still stick to the standards. We still stick to our timelines and approach of education, but we really look at our modern community. We look at our modern impact that our that's having on the students, and let them have voice in what this means and how it adds up. I think there's also a fear of criticism from parents and community when teachers start doing things differently, when they take a new approach, when it's not that straight line desks and everyone comes in and sits down and listens. Then you have some community or parent feedback that, oh, this education is not what it was that I experienced. And I can personally say I wasn't in a high school environment, man, it was 30 years ago, 35 years ago. And we've changed. 21st century isn't about sitting in straight lines and listening to the teacher for everything.
Ryan, we've lost your audio again.
Am I there again?
Yes.
Oh, I apologize. I'm sorry about that. California must have bad Wi-Fi right now. I was just wrapping up saying that it's really changing the approach to we're in 21st century. We have to modernize how we see students as participants in the classroom, not just passive listeners and not just someone who's going to regurgitate the facts that's being given to them, but it's someone who's going to take information, adapt that information for their needs and express themselves with it.
Awesome. Ryan, before we lose you again to California internet, I wanted to ask a follow-up question because we've had a lot of interest from the participants on this regarding to how integrating youth could be supporting an issue such as bullying in schools.
So when we talk about those leadership classes, and they're really looking at school issues, bullying and online bullying has been one of the leading topics. It's something that kids are very concerned with. It's something that kids see as a immediate issue that needs attention. And so I think giving them more spaces to where they can discuss this, where they can expose the problems, they can talk within themselves is really how we're going to start to see change when it comes to bullying. And instead of hiding it and just not addressing it, we need to listen to the students about how come it's happening, where is it happening, and allowing students to drive some of that change, create policy.
Awesome. Before moving on to some other questions, Azim, did you have anything to add to the open-ended question before I cut you off? I'm so sorry.
Yeah, no, actually, I think Alex and Ryan did an amazing job about sharing power and getting more student voices in. And I agree and endorse everything they said. And I know NYLC is very big in service learning projects because I truly believe that partnership between adults and students comes alive when you are doing something, and I think Ryan talked about you have to act on it. And it's important to co-design those survey learning projects, much like the book that middle school students at High Tech High wrote about my story. But the only thing that I would add, that one of the things that I have learned in 30 years of this work is we need to make adults more humble. We need to teach humility, not only adults, but parents as well as the faculties, because I truly believe that you can learn and have a good idea from a 5-year-old. I mean, if you are listening, I have 3 grandchildren, and I know when they are dealing with issues, I always tell them, well, what does your inner guidance tell you? You have the answers. Rather than tell them what to do, is to try and have them discover and help them make their own decision. But I think it takes humility. The tendency sometimes in adults is to tell them what to do. There's no learning there. The only learning comes in when they discover within themselves. And I think that humility could be an important teacher, especially to our adults. Because I think if we can bring humility into the school system with our parents, then I think they automatically will listen to young people, because that's what humility does. And we teach that, because one of our big lessons, we have a particular experiential program teaching empathy. How do you build your empathy muscle? And the idea there is you put yourself in the shoes of the student. So you are not essentially going from telling them what to do, but rather than helping them discover what answers they already have within them. And I think that can be very transformative.
Yes, absolutely. I think all 3 panelists, you were able to kind of go towards the central idea. Alex, you talked about being comfortable giving up power. Ryan, you talked about being comfortable inside of school, of breaking those habits. And Azim, you've talked about making adults more humble. This idea of the fact that the adults need to take a step back and kind of realize that at some point they're not going to have the answers is something I see shared in all of your answers. And I think it's so powerful. As we move towards closing, I want to ask each panelist one final question. It's going to be the same question. What is one commitment you're making or one question you're taking with you as a result of this conversation? Ryan?
One commitment that I'm continuing to make, and I'm going to keep carrying out as long as I stick within education, is focusing on student empowerment. It's giving students their rightful voice. Too often, we as adults think we have all the answers, and the administration has all the answers, and we fail to recognize that the complex issues that we are struggling with and dealing with right now, our students are dealing with those, and they have solutions. They have ideas that we just neglect to realize or recognize at times because we're so focused on, oh, we're going to make the change. We're the adults. We're in the room, instead of giving a kind of true voice to our students. We mentioned we create these councils, we create these youth advisories, but at times we really don't create action off of that. And I'm going to keep pushing for student-led action and student-led power.
Alex?
I mean, so similar to Ryan. I think for me, my commitment is to continue working with adults of all ages, of all backgrounds, to help them think through how to develop stronger intergenerational leadership capacity. And everyone, feel free to reach out on LinkedIn, look up my name. Happy to chat with anyone that might be helpful. And on the other end, one thing I really strive to do in this call is really furthered my commitment on what does it look like to continue opening the doors, and not just opening the doors, but reaching my hand out to all the young people who have yet to have these opportunities, to make sure that any young person that is looking to lead has the opportunity to lead and serve in their communities.
Amazing. And Azim?
Right, and I think that Alex talked about that earlier, that students have lost a lot of trust in us and democracy and all the stuff that is, dividing us as a country. And probably I've, emigrated to the United States 50 some years ago. I've never seen it so polarized. But the good news, which I've been reading more about, is that there is a spike in young people getting involved with causes. And it's substantially higher than it was in 2020. And that tells me that we as adults obviously don't have the answers, because see the kind of world we've created for the young people. The young people, I believe, will have answers to help us move forward in a more hopeful and a positive way. That we need to have the humility to see that they are our future, and they need to have their voice, and they are more concerned about the way the world is today and are becoming more engaged. And I think that engagement is a very key thing to me take away from this conversation, because this is where you learn. More than talking and learning and book stuff, but I think when you are actually doing and acting, and I think Ryan and Ed and Alex both talked about it, it's the service learning project. I'm a very big fan of that. But then have the students and the young people teach us, not the other way around.
Thank you all for your honesty, leadership, and willingness to engage deeply. Before we close, I want to share my own reflection. Today reminds us that centering youth voice isn't about inviting young people into existing systems unchanged. It's about adults being willing to evolve, share power, and sometimes step back so something better can emerge. Thank you to our panelists, our partners at Points of Light, and everyone who joined us today. I'll now turn it back to Amy to share what's next and officially close us out.
Emiliana, thank you so much. You were an amazing facilitator, as always. We just appreciate your leadership. And to Alex, Azim, Ryan, thank you so much for being on the panel. It was an amazing conversation. I think we could we could keep you on for probably another hour and take a deeper dive into this. There's so much richness when we start to talk about the power of youth voice, youth adult partnership. I hope that everyone who joined us today, it piqued your interest to join us in person in June 22nd, or I'm sorry, 23rd through the 25th in Washington, D.C. for the Points of Light conference. It's where NYLC and Points of Light are coming together. It's going to be a powerful event. Of course, there's also more events leading up to our in-person conference. We are having Points of Light webinar on February 25th, Building Fluency with Artificial Intelligence. NYLC is having another thought leader panel on March 12th, Understanding Young People's Political and Civic Engagement as a Counter to Democratic Backsliding. There's so much richness in these events. I hope you will come back and join us, especially in person. We're expecting like 1,500 people, social impact leaders from across the nation and globally. It's 3 days. There's inspiration, connection, learning from those adults in the room and those young people. So please join us in Washington, D.C. in June, and you can expect some registration information as well as this recording in your inbox. So watch for that. Thank you all so much.